They called her the Ghost Bride, a woman who walked down the aisle in white lace only to discover her husband never wanted her at all. Vivian Sterling thought she could survive a loveless arrangement with Manhattan's most dangerous man, but what she didn't know was that Damien Moretti had already buried his heart with another woman. Now, trapped in a mansion of cold silences and public lies, she's done being invisible. This is the story of a marriage built on shadows, a love forged in gunfire, and a woman who refused to be anyone's substitute. Drop a like and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The photographer's flash went off like a gunshot. Vivian flinched, the silk of her wedding dress whispering against marble as 200 guests turned to watch her walk alone down an aisle lined with white roses. Each step felt rehearsed, mechanical. The careful smile, the slow breathing, the way she'd been trained to hold her bouquet at exactly the right angle so the Cartier bracelet on her wrist caught the light. Her father wasn't walking beside her. Lawrence Sterling stood near the front row instead, stone-faced in his tuxedo, watching his only daughter complete the transaction he'd spent 6 months negotiating. This wasn't a wedding, it was a merger. Sterling Hotels needed Moretti protection, and the Moretti family needed legitimacy. Vivian was simply the signature on the contract. She knew all of this. Had known it since the day her father sat her down in his office and explained, with the same tone he used during board meetings, that she would be marrying Damien Moretti in the spring. What she hadn't known was how it would feel to actually do it. The cathedral was stunning. 16-foot ceilings, stained glass windows that turned September sunlight into pools of gold and crimson across white marble. The kind of venue that appeared in bridal magazines with price tags listed as upon request. Her mother would have loved it, Vivian thought distantly. Would have cried through the whole ceremony, probably dabbing at her eyes with monogrammed handkerchiefs. But Catherine Sterling had been dead for 3 years. Heart attack at 51, sudden and brutal, leaving Vivian alone with a father who viewed emotion as a business liability. So Vivian walked alone. The crowd was a blur of designer suits and jewels that cost more than most people's cars. She recognized faces from her father's world. Hotel executives, real estate moguls, politicians who showed up to ribbon cuttings and charity dinners. But the other half of the guests were different, harder. Men in expensive tailoring who wore their violence like cologne. Beautiful women with calculating eyes. People who existed in the shadows where her father's legitimate empire ended and something darker began. That was Damien's world. And in approximately 4 minutes, it would be hers too. She could see him now, standing at the altar in a black Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than her wedding dress. Tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of attractive that didn't need approval. It simply existed, demanded acknowledgement. Dark hair swept back, strong jaw, the kind of face that belonged on magazine covers or movie screens except for the eyes. Even from 15 feet away, Vivian could see them, cold, utterly, devastatingly cold. He wasn't looking at her the way grooms were supposed to look at their brides. There was no softness, no anticipation, nothing that resembled joy or even satisfaction. He was looking at her the way someone might look at a piece of furniture being delivered, mildly interested in whether it would fit the space, nothing more. Something twisted in Vivian's chest, sharp and hot. She told herself she could handle this. Had practiced her poker face in mirrors, rehearsed the serene smile until it felt natural. She didn't need love, didn't even particularly want it, not after watching her parents' marriage, her father's emotional absence, her mother's gradual fading into expensive hobbies and prescription pills. Vivian had made peace with the arrangement, had even convinced herself there might be worse fates than marrying a powerful man who would mostly ignore her. But she hadn't prepared for the coldness, the absolute absence of anything in his eyes when he finally looked at her. The music swelled. Wagner, traditional, obscenely expensive. Probably her father's choice. Everything about today had been negotiations between lawyers, decisions made in conference rooms while Vivian sat silent in tailored dresses, a beautiful object being discussed and positioned. She reached the altar. Damien extended his hand. She took it. His palm was warm, his grip firm and impersonal, like a handshake, like closing a deal. "Dearly beloved," the officiant began, his voice echoing through the cathedral. Vivian barely heard him. She was focused on breathing, on standing straight, on not letting her hands shake. The bouquet felt heavy. Someone had used too much perfume in the front row, something cloying and floral that made her stomach turn. "Do you, Damien Moretti, take this woman?" "I do." His voice was deep, certain, completely devoid of emotion. "And do you, Vivian Sterling?" "I do." Her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. There was no tenderness in the exchange, no moment where their eyes met and something passed between them, no gentle squeeze of hands, none of the small intimacies she'd seen even in other arranged marriages. This was a business transaction being formalized, nothing more. "You may kiss the bride." Damien leaned in. For a split second, Vivian thought she saw something flicker in his expression, hesitation maybe, or distaste, but then his mouth was on hers. Brief, cold, performative, the kind of kiss that existed only because tradition demanded it. Applause erupted. Cameras flashed. Vivian tasted nothing but champagne and regret. The reception was held at the plaza, because of course it was. 14-foot ceilings dripping with crystal chandeliers, tables set with china so delicate it looked like it might shatter if someone breathed too hard. The guest list had somehow multiplied. Vivian counted at least 300 people moving through the ballroom, drinking vintage Dom Perignon and picking at plates of food that had been styled to look more like art installations than dinner. She sat at the head table next to her husband. That word felt strange, sharp in her mind, like something that didn't quite fit. Watching him work the room with the ease of someone who'd spent his entire life performing. Because that's what this was. A performance. Damien smiled when he needed to smile, laughed at the appropriate moments, shook hands with the politicians and business associates, embraced the dangerous-looking men who Vivian assumed were part of his real work, the part that didn't appear on tax returns. He played the role of happy groom with the same cold precision he'd shown at the altar, and watching him was like watching a machine execute a program. He hadn't spoken to her since they'd left the cathedral. Not in the limousine, not during the receiving line, not once during the endless photograph session where they'd been positioned and repositioned like mannequins while the photographer tried to capture something that resembled affection. "Beautiful ceremony," someone said, appearing at Vivian's elbow. A woman in her 60s, dripping in diamonds, with the kind of surgically maintained face that made it impossible to guess her real age. "You must be so happy." "Thank you," Vivian said automatically, her smile perfect and empty. Such a handsome couple. "And the dress? Vera Wang?" "Yes." "Stunning. Absolutely stunning." The woman leaned in conspiratorially, her perfume thick enough to taste. "You've done very well for yourself, dear. The Moretti name opens doors." Vivian's smile didn't waver. "I'm very fortunate." It was the right answer. The woman beamed, patted Vivian's hand, and floated away to spread gossip, or make connections, or whatever it was these people did at weddings. "You're good at that." Vivian turned. Damien was looking at her for the first time since the kiss, his expression unreadable. "At what?" she asked. "Lying." He took a sip of his scotch. The smile, the gratitude, all of it. Very convincing. "I learned from the best." She meant her father, but the words came out harder than intended. Something shifted in Damien's face, there and gone too quickly to identify. "I suppose you did. Is there something you need?" Vivian asked, keeping her voice level. "Someone I should meet? Something I should say?" "No." He set down his glass. "Just making an observation." "Well, observe something else." The words slipped out before she could stop them, sharp and unpolished. Damien's eyebrow lifted slightly. For a moment, Vivian thought she saw actual interest flicker in his eyes, like he'd expected her to stay docile and was mildly surprised she hadn't. But then it was gone, replaced by that same cold indifference. "Careful," he said quietly. "People are watching." "Then maybe you should look like you can stand to be near me." His jaw tightened. "This was your father's deal, not mine." "You think I don't know that?" Vivian kept her smile fixed, speaking through barely moving lips. "You think I chose this?" "No." Damien stood, buttoning his jacket with sharp, precise movements. "But here we are." He walked away. Vivian sat alone at the head table, surrounded by 300 people celebrating a marriage that didn't exist, and felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. This was her life now, this performance, this distance, this beautiful, hollow cage.
Bolsas, but sussen.
The dancing started around 9. Vivian had been dreading this part. The first dance, the thing couples were supposed to do while everyone watched and took photos and pretended the whole thing was romantic instead of transactional. Damien appeared at her side exactly when the band started playing. He didn't ask, just extended his hand with the same impersonal efficiency he'd shown at the altar. They walked to the center of the ballroom. Cameras materialized from everywhere. The opening notes of some classical piece Vivian didn't recognize filled the space. And Damien's hand settled on her waist like it was touching something vaguely distasteful. They moved through the steps mechanically. Vivian had taken ballroom dancing lessons as a teenager, one of those things wealthy daughters did along with French lessons and horseback riding. Damien clearly knew what he was doing too, leading with the kind of precision that suggested either natural talent or expensive instruction. But there was no warmth in it, no connection. They might as well have been strangers forced into proximity on a crowded subway. "Smile," Damien said quietly. "I am smiling." "Smile like you mean it." Vivian tilted her head back slightly, looking up at him with the kind of adoring expression she'd seen in wedding photos. "Better?" "Adequate." His hand pressed slightly harder against her waist, pulling her closer as they turned. To anyone watching, it probably looked romantic, intimate. Vivian could feel the expensive fabric of his suit under her palm, the solid warmth of his shoulder, the faint scent of his cologne, something dark and woody that probably cost more per ounce than most people's rent. He was attractive. She could acknowledge that objectively. Attractive in the way expensive things were attractive, well-made, carefully maintained, utterly untouchable. "How long do we have to do this?" she asked. "Until the song ends." "And after?" "After we make it through the rest of the night. We cut the cake. We accept congratulations. We play our parts." His voice was flat, businesslike. "And then we leave." Something about the way he said leave made Vivian's stomach twist. She'd been trying not to think about what came after the reception, the hotel suite, the expectations, the wedding night that neither of them seemed to want, but tradition demanded they at least pretend to consummate. "Damien!" "Not here." His grip on her hand tightened slightly. Not painful, but firm. Final. "We'll discuss logistics later." Logistics. He was talking about their wedding night like it was a business meeting. The song swelled toward its conclusion. Around them, other couples had joined the dance floor. Her father with some business associate's wife. Damien's underboss with a woman in red who Vivian vaguely recognized from the ceremony. The photographer was circling like a shark, capturing angles, moments that would later be printed in expensive albums and framed for offices and living rooms, evidence of a marriage that didn't exist. The final notes played. Damien stepped back, releasing her with obvious relief. He pressed a brief kiss to her knuckles, for the cameras. And then someone was pulling him away, some business associate with urgent conversation written across his face. Vivian stood alone in the middle of the dance floor, surrounded by 300 people, and had never felt more isolated in her life. The rest of the reception blurred together in a haze of champagne and forced smiles. Vivian circulated through the crowd, accepting congratulations from people she'd never met, making small talk about the ceremony and the dress and how fortunate she was. She danced with her father, a stiff, awkward 3 minutes where Lawrence Sterling made vague comments about hotel expansion plans and barely looked at her. She danced with Damien's underboss, a man named Marcus, who had kind eyes and said nothing of substance. She posed for more photographs, cut an elaborate 5-tier cake she'd never chosen, threw a bouquet she didn't care about. Through it all, Damien was somewhere else. Talking to men in dark suits, disappearing into corners for urgent conversations, playing the role of crime boss at his own wedding with more genuine engagement than he'd shown his actual bride. By 11, Vivian's feet hurt and her face ached from smiling. "It's time." She turned. Damien had appeared beside her, his jacket gone now, tie loosened slightly. He looked tired, she realized, or maybe just done with the pretense. "Time for what?" she asked, though she knew. "To leave." He gestured toward the exit where she could see their driver waiting. "People expect it, the newlyweds departing for their wedding night." Her stomach nodded. "Right." They made their way through the crowd, accepting final congratulations, enduring knowing looks and suggestive comments about what awaited them. Damien's hand stayed on her lower back, possessive to observers, impersonal in reality. They stepped into the night air, and Vivian felt like she could finally breathe. The limousine door closed behind them with a heavy click. Silence filled the space like something physical. The driver pulled away from the plaza, heading uptown toward, Vivian realized with a jolt, not a hotel, toward Damien's brownstone. Their brownstone now, she supposed. She'd never actually seen it before. All the wedding planning, all the negotiations, and she'd never once visited the place she'd be living. "We need to establish some ground rules," Damien said, staring out the window. Vivian looked at him. In the dim light of the passing street lamps, his profile was sharp, classical, like something carved from marble. "Ground rules. This marriage serves a purpose. Your father gets protection and access to my connections. I get legitimacy and a buffer for certain business operations." He still wasn't looking at her. "But I want to be very clear about what this is and isn't." "Which is?" "A business arrangement, nothing more." Now he turned, and Vivian saw something in his eyes that was worse than coldness. It was pity. "I'm not going to pretend to care about you, Vivian. I'm not going to play house or have dinner conversations or any of the things you might have imagined marriage would include." "I didn't imagine anything," she said quietly. "Good. Then we understand each other." He unbuttoned his cuffs, rolling up his sleeves with sharp, efficient movements. "You'll have your own rooms in the house, your own space. I won't bother you, and I expect the same courtesy. And tonight?" Something flickered across his face. Distaste, maybe. "Tonight, nothing happens. I know tradition dictates otherwise, but I'm not interested in forcing intimacy where none exists." Vivian should have felt relieved. Should have been grateful he wasn't the type to demand consummation like some trophy to be claimed. But instead, she felt something worse than fear. She felt dismissed, rejected before she'd even had a chance to be considered. "Why did you agree to this?" she asked. "If you hate the idea so much, why marry me at all?" "Because my father asked me to before he died." Damien's voice was flat. "Because the family needed it. Because sometimes we do things we don't want for reasons bigger than ourselves. And I'm just the thing you don't want." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Vivian saw something complicated in his expression. "You're the reminder of everything I lost," he said quietly. "And I can't." He stopped himself, jaw tightening. "It doesn't matter. The point is, don't expect anything from me. Don't wait up hoping I'll change my mind. Don't plan romantic dinners or try to make this something it isn't." "I wasn't planning to," Vivian said, and was surprised by how steady her voice came out, how cold. "Good." The limousine pulled up in front of a 5-story brownstone in the Upper East Side. Elegant, expensive, the kind of building that whispered old money and careful maintenance. A doorman appeared to open the car door. Damien stepped out first, then extended his hand to help Vivian. She took it, stepping onto the sidewalk in her Vera Wang dress and Louboutin heels, and followed her husband into the house that would be her cage. The interior was exactly what Vivian expected. Hardwood floors, high ceilings, furniture that looked expensive and uncomfortable. Everything in blacks and grays and deep browns, masculine and cold, like the decorator had been specifically instructed to remove anything that might suggest warmth or personality. "Your rooms are on the 3rd floor," Damien said, already heading toward the stairs. "East wing. The housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, will show you everything in the morning." "Where are your rooms?" Vivian asked. "West wing?" He paused on the landing, looking back at her. "Opposite side of the house. You won't be disturbed." Won't be disturbed. Like she was a guest he was obligated to accommodate rather than his wife. Vivian followed him up 2 flights of stairs, her dress whispering against the steps. The 3rd floor hallway was long, lined with closed doors and original artwork that probably cost more than most people made in a year. Damien stopped in front of a door at the far end. "This is you," he said, pushing it open. The suite beyond was beautiful. Vivian had to give him that. A large bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the street, a sitting area with a fireplace, what looked like a walk-in closet the size of her childhood bedroom. Everything decorated in soft creams and pale blues, feminine without being juvenile, clearly designed by someone who knew what they were doing. "Your things were moved in this afternoon," Damien continued. "If you need anything, there's an intercom system. Mrs. Chen can help you." "Where will you be?" Vivian asked. "Working." He was already backing toward the door. I have calls to make. Business doesn't stop for. He gestured vaguely at her dress, at the space between them. This. It's our wedding night. Yes. And I've explained what that means. His hand was on the doorknob now. Get some rest, Vivian. Tomorrow we have a brunch with your father and several business associates. We'll need to maintain appearances. Appearances, she repeated. That's what this is. An appearance. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be. He paused in the doorway, and for just a moment, Vivian thought she saw something almost like regret in his eyes. But then it was gone. Good night. The door closed. Vivian stood alone in her beautiful prison, still wearing her wedding dress, and heard the lock click from the outside. She stared at the door for a long moment, processing what had just happened. He'd locked her in. Actually locked her in like what? Like a prisoner? Like something that needed to be contained? Her hand shook as she reached up to remove her veil. The pins had given her a headache, pressing into her scalp for hours. She pulled them out one by one, letting the delicate lace and silk fall to the floor in a heap of white. The dress followed. She had to struggle with the buttons alone, her arms cramping as she reached behind herself, but eventually it pooled at her feet like a collapsed parachute. She stood in her underwear in the middle of the ornate bedroom and felt the full weight of her situation settle over her like a shroud. This was her life now. Locked in a beautiful room, in a beautiful house, married to a beautiful man who looked at her like she was a ghost, who'd made it abundantly clear she was unwanted, unnecessary, nothing but an obligation he'd been forced to accept. Vivian walked to the window, pressing her palm against the cool glass. 3 stories down, Manhattan glittered with life. People in restaurants, cars moving through streets, the city existing in all its messy, chaotic humanity. She was surrounded by millions of people and had never felt more alone. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark glass. 24 years old, blonde hair falling loose around her shoulders, still wearing the expensive lingerie she'd bought for a wedding night that would never happen. She looked like someone's fantasy, like a doll placed carefully on a shelf. Behind her, the bedroom door remained closed, locked. And somewhere in the West Wing, her husband was making business calls, already having forgotten she existed. Vivian pressed her forehead against the window and let herself acknowledge, just for a moment, how badly this hurt. How the coldness in Damien's eyes had carved something hollow in her chest. How she'd walked into this marriage knowing it was an arrangement, but somehow still hoping for, what, basic decency? The possibility of friendship, eventually? Something more than this Arctic dismissal? She'd been an idiot, a romantic idiot who'd let herself believe arranged marriages could evolve into something real. Who'd watched too many movies where the cold husband eventually thawed, where love conquered all, where women like her didn't end up locked in ornate cages on their wedding nights. A laugh escaped her throat, sharp, bitter, nothing like her usual careful control. It echoed in the empty room, bouncing off expensive furniture and designer wallpaper, and Vivian heard the edge of hysteria in it. She forced herself to breathe, to think. This was her reality now. She could either collapse under the weight of it, or she could adapt, could learn to navigate this new world with the same careful precision she'd learned to navigate her father's world, smile when expected, stay silent when required, play the role assigned to her. The perfect Moretti wife. Beautiful, decorative, utterly invisible. Vivian walked to the closet and found her clothes already hanging in precise rows, her entire wardrobe transported from her father's house and organized with military precision. She pulled on silk pajamas and crawled into the massive bed, pulling expensive sheets up to her chin. The pillow smelled like lavender and money. The mattress was probably orthopedic or memory foam or whatever rich people slept on. Everything in this room was designed for comfort, luxury, the kind of life most people dreamed about. And Vivian had never felt more miserable. She lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the house settling around her. Somewhere below, she could hear Damien's voice, muffled but distinct, speaking rapid Italian into a phone. Business. Always business. The thing that mattered more than his wife, more than appearances, more than basic human decency. Her eyes burned, but she refused to cry. Crying was pointless. Crying wouldn't unlock the door or warm Damien's cold eyes or turn this arrangement into something resembling a real marriage. So Vivian lay still and silent in her gilded cage and waited for morning to come. And in the West Wing, Damien Moretti stood by his window with a tumbler of scotch, staring out at the same Manhattan skyline, trying not to think about the woman he'd just locked away like something dangerous. Trying not to think about how much she looked like the wife he'd buried 3 years ago. Trying not to think at all. Morning came with pale light filtering through curtains Vivian didn't remember closing. She woke disoriented, reaching instinctively for familiar surroundings before remembering where she was. The bedroom looked different in daylight. Still beautiful, still expensive, but somehow less oppressive than it had felt in the dark hours after Damien had walked away. She sat up slowly, her body stiff from tension she'd carried through the night. The wedding dress still lay in a heap on the floor where she'd left it, white silk pooling like spilled milk. Looking at it made something twist in her chest, so she looked away. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Mrs. Moretti?" A woman's voice, accented, professional. "May I come in?" Mrs. Moretti. The name felt foreign, like clothing that didn't quite fit. "Yes?" Vivian called, pulling the sheets higher, even though she was fully covered in silk pajamas. The door opened, unlocked now, she noticed, and a woman in her 50s entered carrying a tray. She was petite, Asian, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. The housekeeper Damien had mentioned, presumably. "Good morning, I'm Mrs. Chen." She set the tray on the bedside table with practiced efficiency. "I've brought coffee and breakfast. Mr. Moretti asked me to inform you that the brunch begins at 11. You have approximately 2 hours." Vivian glanced at the tray. Coffee, fresh fruit, what looked like a croissant still warm from the oven. Her stomach turned at the sight of food. "Thank you. Your wardrobe has been organized by category and color." Mrs. Chen gestured toward the massive closet. "If you need assistance selecting something appropriate for today's event, I'm available." "That won't be necessary." "Very well." Mrs. Chen moved toward the door, then paused. "Mrs. Moretti, if I may, the first weeks in a new home are always difficult. If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask." There was something in her tone, a softness that suggested she understood more than she was saying. Vivian wondered how much the staff knew, how much they'd witnessed in this house before she arrived. "I appreciate that," Vivian said quietly. Mrs. Chen nodded and disappeared, leaving Vivian alone with coffee she didn't want, and a closet full of clothes that now felt like costumes for a role she hadn't auditioned for. She forced herself out of bed. The bathroom was marble and chrome, equipped with products she recognized from expensive department stores. She showered in water too hot, letting it scald her skin until she felt something other than numbness. When she finally stepped out, the mirror was fogged, her reflection a blur. Good. She didn't particularly want to see herself clearly right now. The closet was exactly as Mrs. Chen had described, organized with military precision. Dresses, suits, casual wear, all arranged by type and color in a gradient that probably made sense to someone. Vivian selected a cream-colored dress that looked appropriate for brunch without trying too hard. Sophisticated but not showy. The kind of thing a good Moretti wife would wear. She was applying minimal makeup when she heard movement in the hallway. Male voices, one of them Damien, speaking in rapid Italian. She caught fragments through the door, something about shipments and timing, and someone named Enzo who'd apparently screwed up a delivery schedule. The voices faded. A door slammed somewhere below. Vivian finished with her makeup and stared at herself in the mirror. She looked perfect. Polished, elegant, exactly like the kind of woman who belonged on Damien Moretti's arm. Empty. The face staring back at her could have belonged to anyone. She was halfway down the stairs when she saw him. Damien stood in the foyer, phone pressed to his ear, wearing charcoal slacks and a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked tired, she noticed. Like maybe he hadn't slept either. There were shadows under his eyes, a tightness around his mouth that suggested stress or exhaustion, or both. He glanced up as she descended, his eyes tracking her movement with the detached interest of someone cataloging inventory. He said something sharp in Italian, ended the call, and pocketed his phone. "Good, you're ready." Not a greeting, just an observation. "Mrs. Chen said 11, Vivian replied, matching his tone. "The car's waiting." He was already moving toward the door, clearly expecting her to follow. "Your father has invited several associates. The Castellanos, the Russos, a few others. Standard social performance. You know what to do. Smile and look grateful." He paused, hand on the doorknob, and something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. Essentially, they rode in silence to the restaurant, Someplace in Tribeca that Vivian vaguely recognized from society pages. The kind of establishment where reservations required connections and the waitstaff treated patrons like visiting royalty. Damien spent the entire drive on his phone, typing messages with sharp, precise movements while Vivian stared out the window and tried not to think about how her life had become this, riding in expensive cars with a man who couldn't be bothered to acknowledge her existence. The restaurant's private dining room was already full when they arrived. Her father stood near the windows, drink in hand, deep in conversation with a silver-haired man Vivian recognized as Anthony Russo, a real estate developer with connections throughout the city. Other faces she knew from the wedding circulated through the space: business associates, political operatives, the kind of people who made decisions in rooms like this that affected thousands of lives. "There they are!" Lawrence Sterling's voice boomed across the room, artificially warm. The happy couple. Vivian felt Damien's hand settle on her lower back as they entered. Possessive to observers, impersonal in reality. She'd already learned to recognize the difference. "Mr. Sterling," Damien's voice shifted into something smoother, more practiced, the public version of himself. "Thank you for arranging this." "Nonsense, nonsense. We're family now." Her father embraced Damien with the kind of backslapping enthusiasm he reserved for board members and investors. Then he turned to Vivian, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "You look lovely, sweetheart." "Thank you, Dad." "Doesn't she?" He addressed the room now, drawing attention. "My beautiful daughter, the new Mrs. Moretti." Polite applause rippled through the gathered guests. Vivian maintained her smile, feeling like a prize horse being shown off at auction. The next hour was a blur of handshakes and hollow congratulations. Vivian played her part perfectly. The gracious bride, the devoted daughter, the woman thrilled to have married into the Moretti family. She laughed at jokes that weren't funny, accepted compliments she didn't deserve, and deflected invasive questions about wedding nights and future grandchildren with practiced ease. Through it all, Damien stayed close but distant. His hand never left her back when people were watching, but the moment attention shifted elsewhere, he dropped the contact like it burned him. They were a team in performance only, two actors hitting their marks for an audience that demanded the show continue. "So when can we expect little Morettis running around?" asked Maria Russo, Anthony's wife, with the kind of invasive enthusiasm that wealthy older women seemed to think was charming. Vivian felt Damien tense beside her. "We're in no rush," she said smoothly. "We want time to enjoy being newlyweds first." "Oh, of course. Of course." Maria leaned in conspiratorially. "But don't wait too long, dear. Biology waits for no one." Damien's jaw tightened. Vivian could feel anger radiating off him, though his expression remained neutral. "If you'll excuse us," he said, his hand pressuring Vivian's back. "We need to speak with the Castellanos." He steered her away before Maria could respond, guiding her toward the far side of the room, where a dark-haired couple stood examining the wine selection. "You handled that well," Damien said quietly, his mouth barely moving. "I've had practice." "I can see that." There was something almost like approval in his tone. Almost. They spent another 20 minutes working the room, moving through conversations like synchronized dancers. Vivian was good at this, she realized, better than she'd given herself credit for. Years of her father's dinner parties and charity events had trained her to read rooms, to know when to speak and when to stay silent, to present exactly the image people expected to see. She was watching Damien deflect questions about expansion plans when she noticed the woman. She stood near the entrance, late 20s maybe, with dark hair and sharp cheekbones, beautiful in an obvious way, wearing a dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent. But what caught Vivian's attention was how she was looking at Damien, with the kind of familiarity that spoke of history. "Who is that?" Vivian asked quietly. Damien followed her gaze, and his expression went carefully blank. "Sofia Castellano, Vincent's daughter." "She's staring at you." "She does that." He took a sip of his drink, his tone dismissive. "It's not relevant." But the way Sofia was looking at him suggested it was very relevant. There was possession in that gaze, territorial and sharp, like seeing something that had once belonged to her now standing beside someone else. Vivian felt something hot and uncomfortable twist in her chest. Jealousy, maybe, though that seemed absurd given the circumstances. Why should she care if her husband had a history with other women? He'd made it clear their marriage was business only, that she shouldn't expect anything resembling fidelity or affection. Still, the way Sophia looked at him made Vivian want to step closer, to mark territory she had no real claim to. Damien, darling. Sophia materialized beside them like she'd been waiting for an opening. Up close, she was even more striking, the kind of beauty that came from expensive maintenance and good genetics. Her smile was all teeth and calculation. Sophia. Damien's voice was neutral, giving nothing away. I heard congratulations are in order. Sophia's eyes slid to Vivian, assessing and dismissing in the same glance. How lovely. Though I must say it was quite sudden, wasn't it? Business moves quickly, Damien said. Business. Sophia laughed, the sound like breaking glass. Is that what we're calling it? Vivian felt her spine straighten. She'd dealt with women like this her entire life. Society sharks who circled weakness and attacked at the first sign of vulnerability. I'm Vivian, she said, extending her hand with practiced grace. I don't believe we've been introduced. Sophia's handshake was brief, her skin cool. Sophia Castellano. I'm an old family friend. The emphasis on old and family was deliberate, a claim being staked. How nice, Vivian said, matching her smile watt for watt. Damien hasn't mentioned you. Something flickered in Sophia's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or irritation. She turned back to Damien. We should catch up sometime. There's so much to discuss. I'm quite busy, Damien said. I'm sure you can make time. Sophia's hand touched his arm, light and deliberate. For old friends. Vivian watched the exchange with growing clarity. This wasn't just history. This was ongoing. The way Sophia touched him, the way she looked at him, the barely concealed anger in her eyes when she glanced at Vivian, all of it pointed to something unfinished. Before Vivian could respond, her father appeared at her elbow. Sweetheart, the Russos want a photo with the newlyweds. For their holiday card, apparently. Of course. Vivian let herself be steered away, but not before catching Sophia's satisfied smile. The photo session took 10 minutes. Vivian stood beside Damien, his arm around her waist, both of them smiling at Maria Russo's phone like this was the happiest day of their lives, like they hadn't spent their wedding night in separate wings of the house, like he hadn't looked at another woman with more warmth than he'd ever shown his wife. By the time they returned to the main room, Sophia had disappeared. Let's go, Damien said abruptly. We've made our appearance. They made their excuses and left, climbing back into the car that felt smaller and more suffocating than before. Damien immediately pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages with focused intensity. Who is she really? Vivian asked. I told you, Vincent Castellano's daughter. That's not what I'm asking. Damien's jaw tightened. It's not your concern. She touched you like she had the right to, like... Vivian stopped herself, hating how jealous she sounded. How weak. Like what? Damien looked at her then, really looked at her, and there was challenge in his eyes. Like we have history? We do. Had, past tense, before you, before this arrangement, before any of it mattered. Does she know that? What Sophia knows or doesn't know isn't relevant to us. Isn't it? Vivian heard her voice rising and forced it back down. I'm your wife. People are going to talk if what? If I'm seen with another woman. Damien's laugh was harsh. Vivian, let me be very clear about something. Our marriage is a legal document, a business arrangement. It doesn't give you ownership of my time, my attention, or my choices. The words hit like a slap. Vivian turned away, staring out the window at Manhattan sliding past. I see. Do you? His voice was quieter now, almost tired. Because I need you to understand this. I didn't choose you. I didn't want this. And I'm not going to pretend otherwise just to make you feel better about a situation neither of us wanted. You think I wanted this? Vivian turned back, anger finally breaking through her careful control. You think I dreamed of marrying a man who looks at me like I'm something he stepped in, who locks me in rooms and talks about logistics instead of... She stopped, breathing hard. Instead of what? Damien's eyes were cold. Love? Romance? Is that what you expected? I expected basic human decency. Then you married the wrong person. The car pulled up in front of the brownstone. Damien was out before it fully stopped, striding toward the entrance without waiting. Vivian followed more slowly, her heels clicking against pavement, feeling like she'd just lost a fight she hadn't known she was in. Inside, the house felt even colder than before. Damien headed straight for his study, already on his phone again, already done with her. Vivian stood in the foyer, surrounded by expensive furniture and original art, and felt the weight of her new reality settle over her like a shroud. This was her life now, this house, this man, this beautiful, hollow existence. Mrs. Chen appeared from the kitchen. "Mrs. Moretti, can I bring you anything?" "No, thank you." Vivian forced a smile. "I think I'll just go upstairs." She retreated to her room, her cage, and closed the door behind her. The wedding dress was gone, she noticed. Someone had cleaned while they were out, removing evidence of last night like it had never happened. Vivian sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her hands. They looked strange in the afternoon light, delicate and useless. Her wedding ring caught the sun, throwing tiny rainbows across the wall. She twisted it slowly, feeling the weight of platinum and diamonds. It was beautiful, expensive, meaningless. Below, she could hear Damien's voice through the floorboards, muffled but angry, speaking rapid Italian into his phone. Working, always working, the thing that mattered more than anything else in his life. Certainly more than his wife. The days that followed developed a rhythm. Damien left early, before Vivian woke, and returned late, long after she'd retreated to her room. They saw each other only when appearances demanded it. Charity dinners, business events, the occasional meal with her father where they performed their roles with practiced precision. In private, they were strangers. He didn't speak to her unless necessary, didn't eat meals with her, barely acknowledged her existence except as an obligation to be managed. Vivian found ways to fill the hours. She explored the house, discovering rooms that hadn't been used in years, a library with first editions she wasn't allowed to touch, a gym in the basement that seemed too clinical to be welcoming. She walked through Central Park, though never without security trailing at a discreet distance. One of Damien's men, always watching, making sure the assets stayed safe. She had lunch with old friends from college, though the conversations felt hollow now. They asked about married life with barely concealed envy, and Vivian lied with the same perfect smile she'd mastered years ago. Everything was wonderful. Damien was wonderful. She was so happy. The lies came easier each time. Mrs. Chen was kind in her quiet way, making sure Vivian ate, occasionally offering conversation that never strayed into dangerous territory. The other staff, a driver named Marcus, a woman who came to clean twice a week, a cook who prepared meals Vivian usually ate alone, maintained professional distance, though she sometimes caught them looking at her with something like pity. They knew. Of course they knew. Servants always knew the truth about the families they served. 2 weeks after the wedding, Vivian was in the library when she found it. She'd been looking for something to read, anything to fill the endless afternoon hours, when a photo album fell from an upper shelf, landing at her feet with a heavy thud. The cover was leather, expensive, the kind of thing meant to preserve important memories. She shouldn't have opened it, should have put it back and walked away. But she didn't. The first photo showed Damien younger, maybe late 20s, his arm around a woman with dark hair and a brilliant smile. They were somewhere tropical, palm trees visible in the background, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. He looked different, happy. The coldness she'd come to associate with him was completely absent. Vivian turned the page. More photos of the same woman. At restaurants, at parties, standing in what looked like this very house. In some photos, she wore an engagement ring, in others a wedding band. Mrs. Damien Moretti, though not the current one. Vivian's hands shook slightly as she continued turning pages. The woman, Isabel she assumed, though no names were written, was beautiful. Striking in a way that transcended simple prettiness. High cheekbones, expressive eyes, the kind of bone structure that aged well. And the way Damien looked at her in these photos was like nothing Vivian had ever seen. Like she was the center of his world, like nothing else mattered when she was in the room. The album ended abruptly. The last photo showed them at what looked like a charity gala. Damien in a tuxedo, Isabel in a black evening gown. They were dancing, her head on his shoulder, his hand spread possessively across her back. The date written in the corner was 4 years ago. Vivian's heart pounded. She flipped through the rest of the album, but the remaining pages were blank. No more photos. No explanation for where Isabel had gone or why this album was buried in a library shelf like something meant to be forgotten. But Vivian knew. She'd seen the carefully controlled grief in Damien's eyes when he thought no one was watching, had noticed how he avoided certain rooms in the house, how his voice changed when people mentioned the past. Isabel was dead, and Damien had never recovered. "What are you doing?" Vivian jumped, the album slipping from her hands. Damien stood in the doorway, his expression dark and dangerous. She'd never seen him look at her this way, with actual emotion instead of cold indifference. It was anger, she realized, raw and barely controlled. "I was looking for a book, and this felt—" "Get out!" His voice was low, lethal. "Damien, I didn't mean to—" "I said get out!" He crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbing the album from where it had fallen, holding it against his chest like something precious. "This is none of your business." "I'm sorry." Vivian heard herself apologizing, though she wasn't sure what for. "I wasn't trying to pry." "Weren't you?" His eyes were chips of ice. "Wasn't this exactly what you were doing? Digging through my life, looking for explanations, trying to understand why I don't want you?" The words hit like physical blows. Vivian felt her face flush, anger rising to meet his. "Maybe I was trying to understand why my husband treats me like I'm invisible, why he can't stand to be in the same room with me, why he looks at me like what? Like I remind you of someone you lost." The silence that followed was absolute. Damien's face went carefully blank, all that anger draining away into something worse, cold, calculated emptiness. When he spoke, his voice was devoid of emotion. "You don't know anything about what I lost." "Then tell me." Vivian stepped forward, suddenly desperate to crack through that ice. "Talk to me like I'm a person instead of an inconvenience you're forced to tolerate." "Why?" Damien's laugh was bitter. "So you can feel better about this arrangement. So you can pretend we're building something real? So I can understand who I married. You married a business agreement, nothing more." He turned away, still clutching the album. "Stay out of this room. Stay out of my past. Stay in your lane, Vivian, and we'll get through this with minimal damage to both of us." "What if I don't want to stay in my lane?" He looked back at her then, and the emptiness in his eyes was worse than anger could ever be. "Then you'll be disappointed, because I have nothing to give you. No affection, no companionship, nothing resembling what you probably imagined marriage would be." "I imagined a partner," Vivian said quietly. "Someone who at least respected me enough to acknowledge I exist." "Then you imagined wrong." Damien walked to the door, paused. "The Castellanos are hosting a gala next weekend. We're expected to attend. Wear something appropriate." He left, taking the photo album with him, leaving Vivian alone in the library with the weight of understanding settling over her like ash. She'd been right. She looked like Isabel. Not identically, but enough that every time Damien looked at her, he saw the woman he'd lost. Every time he spoke to her, he was reminded of what he no longer had. She wasn't a wife to him. She was a walking wound, a constant reminder of grief he couldn't escape. And there was nothing she could do about it. Vivian sank into one of the leather chairs and stared at the empty shelf where the album had been. For the first time since her mother died, she felt tears threatening to break through her careful control. But she didn't cry. Crying was pointless. Crying wouldn't change anything. So she sat in the library until the light faded, surrounded by books filled with other people's stories, and tried not to think about the fact that her own story had become a tragedy she couldn't escape. The dress arrived 3 days before the Castellano Gala, delivered in a black box with tissue paper so pristine it looked like it had never been touched by human hands. Vivian found it sitting on her bed when she returned from another aimless walk through Central Park, the box tied with silver ribbon like some kind of expensive threat. Inside was a gown the color of deep red wine, backless, with a neckline that plunged just enough to suggest without crossing into inappropriate. The kind of dress that cost more than most people's cars and required a specific type of confidence to pull off. There was no note, no explanation, just the dress and the clear expectation that she would wear it. Vivian held it up to the mirror, watching how the fabric caught the light, and felt something hard settle in her chest. This was Damien's doing. Another way to control her, to position her exactly where he wanted her for maximum visual impact. She was a prop in his performance, and this dress was her costume. She should have been angry, should have refused to wear it, chosen something else out of spite. Instead, she laid it carefully across the bed and stared at it for a long time, thinking about the woman in those photographs. about how Damien had looked at Isabel like she was the only thing that mattered in the world. No one would ever look at Vivian that way. She'd known that for weeks now. But maybe, just maybe, she could stop waiting for his approval and start reclaiming some part of herself that didn't exist solely for his benefit. The night of the gala, Vivian took her time getting ready. She'd spent the last 3 weeks being the perfect, invisible wife. Playing her role, staying in her lane, doing exactly what was expected. And where had it gotten her? Locked in a beautiful house with a man who couldn't stand to look at her, treated like furniture that happened to have a pulse. She was done with invisible. The dress fit like it had been made for her body specifically. She paired it with heels that added 3 inches to her height and diamond earrings that had belonged to her mother. Her hair she left loose, falling in waves past her shoulders. Makeup dramatic enough to make a statement without looking like she was trying too hard. When she finally looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. This wasn't the dutiful daughter or the compliant wife. This was someone who looked dangerous, powerful, like she could walk into a room and own it without apologizing. Damien was waiting in the foyer when she descended the stairs. He looked up from his phone, and for just a second, so brief she might have imagined it, something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or appreciation. Then it was gone, replaced by his usual careful neutrality. "You're wearing it," he said. "You had it delivered." Vivian reached the bottom of the stairs, meeting his gaze directly. "I assumed that meant you wanted me to." "It suits you." He pocketed his phone, his eyes traveling over her in a way that felt more analytical than appreciative. "The Castellanos will be watching everything tonight, Sophia especially. I'm aware." "Good." He extended his arm, the gesture so practiced it looked mechanical. "Then let's give them something to watch." The ride to the gala was silent except for the hum of the engine and the occasional ping of messages on Damien's phone. Vivian stared out the window at Manhattan sliding past, the city lit up like something out of a movie, and tried not to think about the fact that she was heading into what essentially felt like enemy territory. The Castellano estate was in Westchester, because of course it was. Old money pretending to be older, a sprawling mansion that tried too hard to look like European aristocracy and ended up looking like a very expensive movie set. Cars lined the circular driveway, Bentleys, Maseratis, a Rolls-Royce that probably cost more than some country's GDP. Damien's hand settled on her lower back as they entered. By now, Vivian had learned to read the pressure of his touch, when it was just for show and when it carried actual meaning. Tonight it felt almost possessive, his fingers spread wide against the bare skin the dress exposed, like he was marking territory. The ballroom was exactly what Vivian expected. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, enough flowers to stock a funeral home. People in designer everything, dripping in jewelry that could fund small nations, all performing wealth and power with varying degrees of success. Sophia appeared within minutes, materializing out of the crowd like she'd been watching for them. She wore white, strategic, Vivian thought, the bride to Vivian's Scarlet Woman, and her smile was all sharp edges. "Damien," she air-kissed both his cheeks, her hand lingering on his arm. "So glad you could make it. And Vivian, what a dress." The way she said it made it sound like an insult. "Thank you," Vivian said smoothly. "You look lovely as well." "Don't I?" Sophia did a small turn, making sure everyone nearby could appreciate the view. "Valentino, custom, obviously. Daddy spares no expense for these things." She turned back to Damien, her smile widening. "We need to steal you for a few minutes. Business talk. You understand, I'm sure, Vivian?" It wasn't a question. Sophia was already pulling Damien away, her hand wrapped around his forearm like she owned him, leaving Vivian standing alone in the middle of the ballroom. Fine, if that's how they wanted to play it. Vivian made her way to the bar, ordered champagne she didn't particularly want, and let herself observe the room. This was Damien's world, she realized. These people with their careful manners and violent undercurrents, their expensive clothes covering up things that would land them in prison if anyone looked too closely. She'd been raised adjacent to this world, had attended enough events to recognize the players, but she'd never been part of it until now. "You must be the new Mrs. Moretti." Vivian turned. The man beside her was maybe 40, attractive in a conventional way, wearing a suit that screamed Italian tailoring. His smile was friendly, but his eyes were calculating. "I am," she said carefully. "Marco De Luca." He extended his hand. business associate of your husband's. We've met a few times, though I doubt he's mentioned me." "He hasn't." Vivian shook his hand briefly. "But then Damien doesn't mention much." Marco laughed. "No, I imagine he doesn't. Damien keeps things close. Always has." He gestured to the crowd where Sophia and Damien were still deep in conversation, her hand still on his arm. "Though some things are harder to keep quiet than others." "Meaning?" "Meaning everyone knows about Sophia and Damien." Marco took a sip of his drink, watching her reaction. "Their history, the fact that she expected to be standing where you are." Vivian felt something cold settle in her stomach, but kept her expression neutral. "People expect a lot of things that don't happen." "True enough." Marco's smile widened. "I like you. You've got spine. That's good. You'll need it, married to a man like Damien." "Is that a warning?" "An observation." He gestured across the room. "This world eats people alive if they're not careful, especially wives who don't know the rules." "Then perhaps you should tell me what the rules are." Marco studied her for a long moment, and Vivian had the distinct feeling she was being evaluated. Finally, he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Rule 1, don't expect loyalty. Rule 2, don't mistake performance for reality. And Rule 3, watch your back, because in this world, everyone's looking for an advantage." "Noted." "Good." He straightened, his public smile returning. "Enjoy the party, Mrs. Moretti. I have a feeling you're going to be more interesting than people give you credit for." He disappeared into the crowd, leaving Vivian alone again with her untouched champagne and a growing sense that she was in deeper water than she'd realized. Across the room, Sophia was laughing at something Damien said, her hand now on his chest, intimate and familiar. Damien wasn't pulling away, wasn't maintaining the professional distance he showed everyone else. He was letting her touch him, letting her lean in close, letting her perform ownership in front of everyone. Something hot and sharp twisted in Vivian's chest. Not jealousy, she told herself. Anger. At the disrespect, at the public humiliation, at being left alone at a party full of strangers while her husband let another woman drape herself all over him. She set down her champagne glass and walked straight toward them. The crowd parted automatically. People recognized trouble when they saw it coming. Vivian was aware of eyes tracking her movement, conversations pausing, the sudden electric anticipation of drama about to unfold. "Damien," she said, her voice carrying just enough to be heard by anyone paying attention. "Dance with me." It wasn't a request. Sophia's smile froze. Damien's expression went carefully blank, his eyes meeting Vivian's with something that might have been warning. "We're in the middle of a conversation," Sophia said, her tone dripping condescension. "Then finish it later." Vivian held Damien's gaze, refusing to back down. "I'd like to dance with my husband." The silence stretched. Around them, people had stopped even pretending not to watch. This was the entertainment they'd come for. The power plays, the territorial disputes, the small wars fought in ball gowns and tuxedos. Damien's jaw tightened. Then, smoothly, he extracted himself from Sophia's grip and extended his hand to Vivian. Of course. They walked to the dance floor in silence. The band was playing something slow and classical, probably chosen because it was appropriately expensive sounding. Damien's hand settled on her waist, his other hand taking hers, and they moved into the first steps of a waltz. "That was unnecessary," he said quietly, his mouth barely moving. "Was it?" Vivian let him lead, her body following his movements with the ease of good training. "Because from where I was standing, my husband was letting another woman paw him in front of 300 people. Sophia and I were discussing business. Sophia was marking territory. There's a difference." His grip on her waist tightened slightly. "You're jealous." "I'm embarrassed." Vivian looked up at him, making sure he could see the anger in her eyes. "You made it very clear our marriage is a performance." "Fine. But if we're performing, then perform. Stop treating me like I'm invisible while you let your ex-whatever hang all over you." "Sophia isn't. I don't care what she is or isn't." Vivian's voice was sharp. "I care that everyone in this room now thinks I'm a joke, the wife who can't even hold her husband's attention for 5 minutes. Damien's eyes narrowed. "You think I care what these people think?" "I think you care about power, about appearances, about the image you project." They turned, the dress swirling around her legs. And right now, the image is that Damien Moretti's wife is so inconsequential he'd rather spend his time with someone else. Something shifted in his expression. You're angry. I'm tired. The honesty slipped out before she could stop it. I'm tired of being treated like furniture, like something you're obligated to maintain but don't actually want around. I told you what this marriage was. You told me it was business. You didn't tell me it would mean being humiliated at parties while you pretend I don't exist. Vivian pulled back slightly, putting distance between them even as they continued dancing. I can handle cold. I can handle indifference. But I will not be disrespected in public. Not by you, and certainly not by Sofia Castellano. The song was ending. Around them, other couples were applauding, returning to conversations and drinks, and the social warfare that passed for entertainment in this world. Damien's hand on her waist didn't release immediately. He looked at her with something she couldn't quite read. Surprise, maybe, or reassessment. You're different tonight, he said quietly. Maybe I'm tired of being invisible. You were never invisible. His voice was strange, almost reluctant. That was never the problem. Before Vivian could ask what he meant, someone was approaching. Vincent Castellano himself, Sofia's father, a man whose handshake probably contained more power than most people's entire careers. Damien, my boy! Vincent clapped Damien on the shoulder with the false warmth of someone who'd built an empire on calculated violence. Beautiful party, isn't it? And Mrs. Moretti, looking stunning as always. Thank you, Vivian said, slipping seamlessly back into her public persona. I need to steal Damien for just a few minutes. Business, you understand. These things can't wait. Vincent was already guiding Damien away, not really asking permission. Sofia will keep you company. And just like that, Vivian was alone again. Sofia materialized beside her, her smile triumphant. Don't take it personally, Sofia said, her voice sweet poison. Damien has always had priorities. Business first, everything else distant second. Including you? Vivian asked pleasantly. Sofia's smile tightened. We had an understanding before you. Had, past tense. Some things don't stay in the past as neatly as you'd like. Sofia moved closer, lowering her voice. You're very pretty, Vivian. I'll give you that. But pretty isn't enough. Not for a man like Damien. Not for this world. Then it's lucky I'm more than just pretty. Are you? Sofia's laugh was sharp. Because from where I'm standing, you're exactly what you appear to be. A trophy wife who doesn't even know the rules of the game she's playing. Vivian felt anger rising, but kept her voice level. Maybe you should worry less about what I know and more about why Damien married me instead of you. The words hit their mark. Sofia's carefully maintained composure cracked, just for a second, and Vivian saw real hurt flash across her face before the mask returned. He married you because your father made it worth his while, Sofia hissed. Don't mistake a business transaction for something more. Damien doesn't love you. He doesn't even like you. You're just the substitute he settled for when... She stopped abruptly, her eyes going wide like she'd said too much. When what? Vivian pressed, but Sofia was already walking away, disappearing into the crowd, leaving Vivian standing alone with the weight of unfinished sentences hanging in the air. Substitute. The word echoed in Vivian's mind. She thought about the photo album, about Isabel's face, about the way Damien had looked at her in those frozen moments, about the resemblance Vivian had tried not to acknowledge. Was that it? Was she not just unwanted, but actively painful to look at because she reminded him of someone he'd lost? The thought made something crack inside her chest. You look like you need another drink. Marco DeLuca had reappeared holding 2 glasses of champagne. He offered one to Vivian with a knowing smile. Rough night? He asked. Something like that. Vivian took the glass, grateful for something to hold. Sofia can be vicious when she wants to be. Marco glanced across the room where Sofia was now holding court with a group of admirers. She thought she'd be Mrs. Moretti. Has thought it for years, actually. Your sudden appearance disrupted those plans. She'll survive. Will you? Marco's tone was light, but his eyes were serious. This world isn't kind to outsiders, Vivian, especially ones who don't have protection. I have Damien. Do you? Marco took a sip of his champagne. Because it doesn't look like it from here. Vivian opened her mouth to respond when she caught sight of Damien across the room. He was still with Vincent and several other men, deep in conversation that looked serious. But his eyes found hers through the crowd, and for just a moment she saw something in his expression that wasn't indifference. It looked almost like concern. Then Vincent said something, and Damien's attention snapped back, the moment broken. "Come on." Marco gestured toward the terrace. "Let's get you some air. This room is suffocating." The terrace was cooler, quieter, the sound of the party muffled by glass and distance. Vivian leaned against the railing, looking out at manicured gardens that probably cost more to maintain than most people's salaries. "Can I give you some advice?" Marco asked. "Can I stop you?" He laughed. "Probably not. Here it is. Stop trying to make Damien care about you. He won't. Can't, maybe. The man's been dead inside since Isabel." Vivian's head snapped up. "You knew her. Everyone knew her. Beautiful, smart, the kind of woman who could navigate this world without losing herself." Marco's expression softened. Damien loved her the way people write songs about. Completely, stupidly. And when she died, he paused. When she died, he died with her. What's left is just going through motions. "How did she die?" Marco studied her for a long moment. "He hasn't told you." "He hasn't told me anything." "Then maybe it's not my story to tell." Marco finished his champagne. "But I will say this. You look like her. Enough that every time Damien looks at you, he's seeing a ghost. That's not your fault, but it's also not something you can fix." The words confirmed what Vivian had already suspected, but hearing them out loud made them real in a way that hurt. "So what am I supposed to do?" she asked quietly. "Just accept being married to a man who wishes I was someone else? Or stop caring what he wishes?" Marco's smile was sad. "You're young, you're smart, you're beautiful. You could have a life here if you stopped waiting for Damien's permission to live it." "What kind of life?" "Your own." He gestured back toward the ballroom. "These people, this world, it runs on power and connections and knowing how to play the game. You're already in it whether you like it or not. Might as well learn the rules." Before Vivian could respond, the terrace door opened. Damien stood there, his expression dark. "Marco," he said flatly, "I need to speak with my wife." "Of course." Marco nodded to Vivian. "Think about what I said." He disappeared inside, leaving Vivian alone with Damien. The air between them felt charged, dangerous. "What did he want?" Damien asked. "To give me advice." "About what? How to survive being married to you?" Vivian met his eyes directly. "Apparently it requires special skills." Damien's jaw tightened. "You shouldn't be out here alone with him." "I wasn't alone. I was having a conversation, something you and I don't seem capable of." Vivian pushed away from the railing. "Why do you care anyway? You've made it very clear I'm free to do whatever I want, as long as I maintain appearances. That's not—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that looked frustrated. "Marco DeLuca isn't someone you should trust." "And you are." The question hung between them. Damien looked at her, really looked at her, and Vivian saw something shift in his expression. The careful neutrality cracked just for a moment, and what showed through looked almost like pain. "No," he said finally. "I'm not." The honesty of it surprised her. They stood there on the terrace, the party continuing inside without them, and for the first time since the wedding, something real passed between them. "She died, didn't she?" Vivian said quietly. "Isabel. The woman in those photographs." Damien's entire body went rigid. "How do you—" "I found the album. Before you found me." Vivian wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm night. "And I look like her. That's why you can't stand to look at me. Why you act like being near me is physically painful. Vivian, just tell me the truth. For once, just tell me the truth." Her voice cracked slightly. "Am I just a substitute? Did my father offer you a replacement for what you lost?" The silence stretched. When Damien finally spoke, his voice was rough. "You're not a replacement. You're a reminder." He turned away, staring out at the gardens. "Every time I look at you, I see what I lost. And I know that's not fair to you. I know you didn't ask for any of this. But I can't—" He stopped. "I can't pretend you're not her. I can't pretend this marriage is anything other than what it is." "Which is what? A punishment? For both of us?" "A necessity." Damien's hands gripped the railing, his knuckles white. The family needed legitimacy. Your father needed protection. The marriage made sense on paper. And in reality? He looked at her then, and the emptiness in his eyes was worse than anger. In reality, I'm a man who buried his wife 3 years ago and can't seem to figure out how to keep living. And you're the woman who got caught in the crossfire of that. Vivian felt something break inside her. Not her heart. That required hope to break, and she'd stopped hoping weeks ago. But something else. Some last fragment of denial that maybe this could work, that maybe they could find a way to coexist that didn't feel like slow drowning. I can't keep doing this, she said quietly. Doing what? Being invisible. Being unwanted. Being a ghost in my own life. She looked at him directly. I won't divorce you. I know that's not an option, not with our father's agreement, but I'm done pretending to be grateful for scraps of basic human decency. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm going to start living my own life. Going where I want, doing what I want, seeing who I want. You want a wife for appearances? Fine. I'll show up when required, smile for the cameras, play my part. But the rest of my time is mine. Damien's expression darkened. That's not how this works. Then explain to me how it does work. Because right now, it looks like you get everything. Your business deals, your freedom, your ability to let other women touch you in public, and I get nothing except a locked door and endless empty hours. You think I'm free? His laugh was harsh. You think any of this is freedom? More free than I am. They stared at each other, two people trapped in a cage they'd both agreed to enter, both realizing too late what it would cost them. We should go back inside, Damien said finally. People will talk. Let them talk. But Vivian was already moving toward the door. I'm done caring what people think. The rest of the party passed in a blur. Vivian smiled when expected, made small talk when required, played the role of perfect wife with the same mechanical precision Damien showed. But inside, something had shifted. Some last attempt at making this marriage work had shattered on the terrace, and what remained was just acceptance. This was her life. This beautiful, hollow existence. And if she couldn't make Damien care about her, she could at least stop destroying herself trying. They rode home in silence. Damien went immediately to his study, already on the phone before the door closed behind them. Vivian went upstairs to her room, took off the red dress, and hung it carefully in the closet. Tomorrow she would start figuring out who she was beyond being Mrs. Damien Moretti. Tonight, she would just survive. She was getting ready for bed when she heard it. Raised voices from downstairs, followed by the sharp crack of glass breaking. Then silence. Vivian stood frozen, listening. Part of her wanted to investigate, to make sure Damien was okay, but a larger part remembered the emptiness in his eyes, the way he'd admitted she was just a reminder of what he'd lost. She climbed into bed and pulled the covers up, trying to block out the sound of her husband's pain echoing through the house. Whatever demons Damien was fighting, they weren't hers to battle. She had enough of her own. The sound of breaking glass still echoed in Vivian's mind when she woke the next morning. She'd barely slept, lying awake listening to the house settle around her, wondering if Damien was okay and hating herself for caring. She found him in the kitchen at dawn, which was unusual. He was never home this early. Usually he left before sunrise, returning long after she'd gone to bed. But here he was, sitting at the counter with a cup of coffee, staring at nothing. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. Good morning, Vivian said carefully. He glanced up, his eyes bloodshot. Morning. The kitchen felt too small suddenly, too intimate. Vivian busied herself with the coffee maker, hyper-aware of his presence behind her, the weight of last night's conversation still hanging between them. About yesterday, Damien started. Don't. Vivian kept her back to him. We said what needed to be said. Let's just leave it. Silence. Then the scrape of his chair against tile. She heard him walk toward the door. Pause. There's a situation, he said, with the Volkov family. It might get complicated over the next few weeks. Vivian turned. Complicated how? The kind that requires extra security. Marcus will be with you whenever you leave the house. Don't argue. Don't try to lose him. This isn't negotiable. What kind of situation? The less you know, the safer you are. His expression was unreadable. Just do what Marcus says, and stay away from the East Side warehouses. Actually, stay away from anywhere near the docks entirely. Fear prickled at the base of Vivian's spine. Damien, I have to go. He was already moving. Mrs. Chen will give you Marcus's number. Use it if anything seems off. He left before she could ask more questions, the front door closing with a finality that felt ominous. Vivian stood alone in the kitchen, her coffee cooling in her hands, and felt the first real tremor of fear since this marriage began. Damien's world had always been dangerous. She'd known that abstractly, the way you know facts without fully processing them. But this felt different, immediate. Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway, her usual composed expression tight with worry. Mrs. Moretti, I've been asked to give you this. She handed over a card with a phone number. Mr. Marcus. He'll be here within the hour. What's happening? Vivian asked. Mrs. Chen's mouth pressed into a thin line. It's not my place to say. But please, follow Mr. Moretti's instructions. These situations, they can escalate quickly. The next 3 weeks were strange. Marcus became a constant shadow, a quiet man in his 40s who drove her everywhere, waited outside shops, positioned himself between her and crowds with the kind of practiced efficiency that suggested military training. He never explained what the threat was, and Vivian learned not to ask. Damien became even more absent. She'd see him occasionally in passing, always on his phone, always tense, dark circles under his eyes, suggesting he wasn't sleeping. Sometimes she'd hear him come home at 3 in the morning, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Once she found him in the library, sitting in the dark, a glass of scotch in his hand, and such emptiness in his eyes that she'd backed away without saying anything. Whatever war he was fighting, it was taking pieces of him. Vivian tried to build the life she'd promised herself on the terrace. She had lunch with old friends, went to gallery openings, volunteered at a literacy center her mother had supported. She smiled and made small talk and pretended everything was fine, that her marriage wasn't a disaster, that her husband wasn't slowly destroying himself with whatever demons he carried. But at night, alone in her room, she could hear him, pacing in his study, taking calls in harsh Italian. Once, the sound of something hitting a wall hard enough to shake the pictures in her room. She wanted not to care, had promised herself she wouldn't care, but she did. It was a Thursday when everything changed. Vivian was at a charity luncheon, some foundation her father supported, the kind of event where wealthy people ate expensive food and congratulated themselves for caring about poverty. She was making polite conversation with a council member's wife when her phone buzzed. Marcus's name on the screen. He never called. "Excuse me," she murmured, stepping away from the table. "Mrs. Moretti." Marcus's voice was tight. "I need you to leave the venue immediately. Don't make a scene, just walk out the front entrance. I'm pulling the car around now." "What's wrong?" "Now, ma'am, please." The urgency in his voice killed any argument. Vivian grabbed her purse, made quick excuses about a family emergency, and headed for the exit. Her heart was pounding, palms sweating. Something was very wrong. Marcus was waiting at the curb, the car already running. He didn't open her door, didn't help her in, just jerked his head toward the back seat and peeled away from the curb the second her door closed. "What's happening?" Vivian demanded. "There was an attack." Marcus's eyes were on the rearview mirror, checking constantly. "One of Mr. Moretti's warehouses. Multiple casualties. The Volkovs are claiming responsibility." "Is Damien—" "He's fine, but the situation's escalating. He wants you somewhere safe until this is resolved." "Safe where?" "The estate in Connecticut. It's secure off the grid. You'll stay there until Mr. Moretti says otherwise." Vivian's mind raced. "I need to pack." "Already done. Mrs. Chen handled it this morning." This morning, before the attack, which meant Damien had known this was coming. They drove north for 2 hours, Marcus silent except for occasional phone calls in rapid Italian. Vivian stared out the window and tried to process what was happening. An attack, casualties, her husband in the middle of what sounded like an actual war. The Connecticut estate was more fortress than house, all stone and security cameras, surrounded by enough land that you couldn't see neighbors in any direction. Marcus pulled up to a gate that required 3 different codes to open. "You'll be safe here," he said as they approached the main building. "There's staff, full security detail, everything you need." "And Damien?" "Fighting." Marcus's expression was grim. "That's what he does." 2 men in dark suits met them at the entrance. Marcus handed Vivian off like precious cargo, gave sharp instructions in Italian, and left. The house was beautiful and cold, like every other property Damien owned. A woman in her 60s introduced herself as Mrs. Perry, the estate manager, and showed Vivian to a suite of rooms that felt less like a guest quarters and more like a very nice prison. "Mr. Moretti asked me to ensure you have everything you need," Mrs. Perry said. "The kitchen is fully stocked. There's a library and gym if you'd like. The security team will be monitoring the grounds at all times. How long am I supposed to stay here?" "As long as necessary, I'm afraid." Mrs. Perry's smile was sympathetic. "I know it's not ideal, but Mr. Moretti is very concerned for your safety." Concerned, as if he'd ever shown concern for her before. The first few days were surreal. Vivian had nothing to do but read, walk the grounds under watchful eyes, and wait. Mrs. Perry was kind but professional, the security team silent and omnipresent. She felt like she was in some kind of beautiful isolation chamber. No word from Damien. She called, texted, left messages. Nothing. It was on the 5th night, when Vivian was starting to feel like she might actually lose her mind from the isolation, that her phone finally rang. Damien's name on the screen. "Hello?" She hated how desperate she sounded. "Are you safe?" His voice was rough, exhausted. "I'm fine. Damien, what's happening?" "I can't talk long. The situation is contained but not resolved. You need to stay there until I say otherwise." "That's not an answer. People died, Damien. An actual attack happened and you sent me away like I was trying to keep you alive." His voice was sharp. "Yes, that's exactly what I did. I deserve to know what's going on." "No." He sounded absolutely wrecked. "You deserve to be somewhere safe while I clean up this mess. That's all that matters right now." "To who? To you?" Vivian felt anger rising. "You don't get to ship me off to some fortress and then refuse to explain why. I'm your wife, not a possession you store away when things get inconvenient." "You think I wanted this?" Damien's laugh was bitter. "You think I wanted to put you in danger by marrying you? This is my world, Vivian. Violence and blood and people dying for territory and pride. And you're in it now whether either of us likes it." "Then let me in all the way." The words came out before she could stop them. "Stop protecting me like I'm fragile. Stop hiding things. Just talk to me like I'm a person who can handle the truth." Silence on the other end. Vivian could hear background noise, voices, what sounded like traffic. He wasn't at the house. "I can't," Damien said finally, quietly. "I can't let you in. It's not because you're weak or because I think you can't handle it. It's because everyone I let in dies. Everyone I care about ends up—" He stopped. "Just stay there. Please. I'll come get you when it's safe." The line went dead. Vivian stared at her phone, her heart pounding. "Everyone I care about." Had he meant to say that? Or had exhaustion made him careless with words? She tried calling back. It went straight to voicemail. 3 more days passed. Vivian felt like a caged animal, pacing the beautiful rooms, walking the grounds until the security team probably thought she was insane. Mrs. Perry tried to keep her occupied with activities and conversation, but nothing helped the growing sense that something terrible was happening and she was trapped here, useless. On the 8th day, Vivian was in the library when she heard commotion outside. Car engines, multiple voices, the sharp bark of orders being given. She ran to the window and felt her heart stop. Damien was getting out of a black SUV, but he wasn't alone. 2 men were supporting him, one on each side, and even from a distance Vivian could see blood on his white shirt. She was down the stairs and out the front door before conscious thought caught up with action. "What happened?" she demanded, her voice too loud, too sharp. "What the hell happened?" Damien looked up, his face pale, jaw tight with pain. "Vivian, you shouldn't—" "Don't tell me what I shouldn't." She was beside him now, trying to assess the damage. Blood soaked through his shirt on the right side, spreading dark against white fabric. "How bad is it?" "Not as bad as it looks." But his voice was strained, and when one of the men shifted their grip, Damien's breath hissed out between clenched teeth. "Get him inside," Vivian ordered. "Now." They moved him to one of the ground floor bedrooms. A doctor was already there. Apparently he'd been called ahead. A severe man in his 50s who took one look at Damien and started barking orders. "Everyone out," the doctor said. I need space to work." "I'm staying," Vivian said. "Ma'am, I said I'm staying." She looked at Damien, daring him to argue. He didn't, just nodded slightly, his eyes already hazy with pain. What followed was brutal. The doctor cut away Damien's shirt, revealing a deep gash along his rib cage that made Vivian's stomach turn. Not a bullet wound. Something sharper, cleaner. A knife, maybe. "This needs stitches," the doctor muttered, prepping supplies. "You're lucky it missed anything vital." "Lucky," Damien repeated, his voice dry. "That's one word for it." The doctor worked efficiently, cleaning the wound, preparing sutures. Damien's face was white, sweat beading on his forehead, but he didn't make a sound. Just gripped the edge of the bed hard enough that his knuckles went bone white. Vivian found herself moving without thinking, taking his free hand. "It's okay," she said quietly. "Just breathe." His eyes found hers, something complicated passing through them. Then he squeezed her hand hard enough to hurt as the doctor started stitching. It took 20 minutes. 20 minutes of watching her husband's face go progressively paler, feeling his grip on her hand tighten and release in waves, hearing his controlled breathing occasionally hitch when the pain spiked. Finally, the doctor stepped back. "Done. Keep it clean, change the dressing twice daily, no strenuous activity for at least 2 weeks. I'll leave antibiotics and painkillers." "Thank you," Damien managed. The doctor gathered his supplies and left, closing the door quietly behind him. Silence filled the room. Damien's hand was still holding Vivian's, though his grip had loosened. He stared at the ceiling, breathing carefully, his face still too pale. "What happened?" Vivian asked quietly. "Volkov's second son decided to make a point." Damien's voice was flat. "Came at me with a knife in a parking garage. Stupid, desperate move. His father's going to kill him for the embarrassment." "Did you—" "He's alive, barely. But alive." Damien finally looked at her. "This is why I sent you away. This is what my world looks like up close." "I can see that. And you're still here." Something that might have been surprise flickered across his face. "Holding my hand while a doctor stitched me back together. Where else would I be?" "Running." He said it simply, matter of fact. Most people would be. Vivian realized she was still holding his hand and carefully extracted hers. "I'm not most people." "No." Damien was studying her with an expression she couldn't read. "You're not." A knock interrupted whatever he might have said next. One of the security team stuck his head in. "Mr. Moretti, we have a situation. The Volkovs sent a message." Damien started to sit up, winced, tried again. "What kind of message?" "The kind that requires your attention. Now." "I'll be there in 5 minutes." The man disappeared. Damien swung his legs over the side of the bed, moving carefully, his face tight with pain. "You can't be serious," Vivian said. "You were just stitched up. This doesn't stop because I'm hurt." He was already reaching for a clean shirt someone had left on a chair. "This is how it works." "Then let me help." He paused, shirt in hand. "What? Let me help." Vivian stood, moving closer. "You can barely move your right arm. You need someone to help you dress, drive you wherever you're going, keep you from passing out and cracking your head open. Let me do it." "Vivian, I'm serious." She met his eyes directly. "You said everyone you let in dies. Fine. But I'm already in whether you like it or not. I'm your wife. I'm part of this world. So stop trying to protect me from it and let me actually be useful." Damien stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, he held out the shirt. They drove back to Manhattan in silence, Vivian behind the wheel of Damien's car while he sat in the passenger seat, his face drawn with pain he was trying to hide. The security team followed in another vehicle, close enough to intervene if necessary. "The Moretti Building," Damien said. "Downtown. You know it?" "I'll find it." She did, pulling up in front of a sleek high-rise that probably housed both legitimate businesses and less legal operations. Men in suits materialized immediately, opening Damien's door, helping him out with practiced efficiency. "Mrs. Moretti." Marcus appeared beside her window. "You should wait in the car." "No." She was already getting out. "I'm coming in." "Ma'am, this really isn't—" "She's with me," Damien said, his voice carrying enough authority that Marcus stepped back. They took a private elevator to the top floor. The space they entered looked more like a war room than an office. Multiple monitors showing security feeds, men bent over laptops, a large table covered in maps and documents. Everyone looked up when Damien entered, relief visible on their faces. "Status," Damien said, moving to the head of the table. Vivian noticed he was using it for support, leaning slightly to take weight off his injured side. A man Vivian recognized as Antonio, one of Damien's senior lieutenants, stepped forward. The Volkovs want a meeting. Neutral ground. They're claiming the attack was unauthorized, that Victor acted without his father's knowledge. Do we believe that? No. Antonio's expression was grim. But they're scared. The retaliation hit harder than they expected. They want to negotiate before this escalates further. Damien was quiet for a moment, thinking. Vivian watched him, seeing the calculation in his eyes, the way he was processing information and running scenarios. This was his element, injured and exhausted, but still completely in control. Set it up, he said finally, but I choose the location and I bring twice the security they're allowed, non-negotiable. Done. Antonio made notes. When? Tomorrow night. Gives me time to... Damien swayed slightly, caught himself on the table edge. Vivian was beside him immediately. You need to sit down. I'm fine. You're bleeding through your bandage. She pointed to the spreading red stain on his shirt. Sit. Down. For a moment she thought he'd argue. Then he lowered himself into a chair, his face going gray. Meeting's over, Vivian said, addressing the room with more authority than she felt. Everyone out. Now. To her surprise, they listened. Within 30 seconds, the room had cleared except for her and Damien. That was impressive, he said quietly, ordering my men around. Someone has to. Vivian was already on her phone calling the doctor. Since you're apparently determined to tear your stitches open playing tough guy. I'm not playing. No, you're being an idiot. She knelt beside his chair, carefully lifting his shirt to examine the bandage. Blood had soaked through, spreading dark across white gauze. This needs to be redressed, and you need to rest or you're going to end up passed out on this floor. Can't rest. Too much to do. Then delegate. Vivian looked up at him, close enough now to see the exhaustion etched in every line of his face. You have an entire organization. Use it. Let other people handle things while you recover. You don't understand how this works? Then explain it to me. Her voice was sharp. Stop treating me like I'm too delicate to handle reality, and explain why you'd rather bleed out than take a few hours to heal. Damien stared at her, and something in his expression shifted. If I show weakness, someone will try to take advantage. That's how this world works. The second they think I'm vulnerable, the second they believe I can't lead, he stopped. People die. More people than the ones who already have. So you'd rather die yourself? If that's what it takes to keep everyone else alive. He said it simply, like it was obvious. That's the job. The doctor arrived then, cutting off whatever Vivian might have said. He took one look at Damien and shook his head. I told you no strenuous activity. This wasn't strenuous, Damien said. I was sitting. You tore 3 stitches. The doctor was already removing the soaked bandage. I need to redo this, and this time, Mr. Moretti, you're going to actually follow my instructions. The second round of stitching was worse than the first. Damien's reserves were depleted, his pain tolerance worn down, and when the needle went in, he couldn't quite suppress a sharp intake of breath. Vivian found his hand again without thinking, holding it while the doctor worked. This time, Damien didn't hesitate, just gripped her hand hard and kept his eyes fixed on the ceiling. Almost done, the doctor murmured. Just a few more. When it was finally finished, Damien looked completely drained. The doctor gave him a shot of something for the pain and left with strict instructions about rest and proper wound care. You need to sleep, Vivian said. Need to finalize the meeting parameters. Antonio can handle it. She stood, moving to block his path. You're going to the brownstone, you're going to bed, and you're going to sleep for at least 6 hours. That's not negotiable. You're very bossy all of a sudden. Someone has to be. Vivian held out her hand. Come on, I'm driving. He looked at her hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, he took it and let her help him up. The drive back to the brownstone was quiet. Damien dozed in the passenger seat, his face relaxed in a way Vivian had never seen. Without the armor of coldness, without the careful control, he looked younger, vulnerable, human. She got him inside and up the stairs to his room, the first time she'd actually been in his wing of the house. His bedroom was sparse, masculine, everything in blacks and grays, no photos, no personal items, nothing that suggested the space was lived in rather than just occupied. "I can manage from here," Damien said, but he swayed as he said it. "Sure you can." Vivian guided him to sit on the edge of the bed. "Where do you keep clean shirts?" "Closet, left side." She found one, brought it back. "Arms up." He obeyed without arguing, too exhausted to fight. Vivian carefully removed his ruined shirt, trying not to look at the expanse of his chest, the muscle and scars that told stories she didn't know. She helped him into the clean shirt, her fingers brushing against his skin, both of them carefully not acknowledging the intimacy of the moment. "There," she said, stepping back. "Now lie down before you fall down." Damien lowered himself onto the bed with a sound that might have been relief. His eyes were already closing, the painkillers kicking in. "Vivian," he said quietly, his voice slurring slightly. "Yeah? Thank you." He was fading fast. "For staying, for—" His words trailed off as sleep claimed him. Vivian stood there for a moment, watching him sleep. In the dim light from the hallway, he looked less like the cold, distant man who'd married her and more like someone who carried too much weight alone. She should leave, should go back to her room and maintain the careful distance they'd established. Instead, she found herself pulling a chair close to the bed and settling into it. Just for a little while, she told herself. Just to make sure he didn't spike a fever or tear his stitches again in his sleep. Just to make sure he was okay. The chair was uncomfortable, but Vivian didn't move. She watched Damien's chest rise and fall with steady breaths, watched the tension slowly drain from his face, and felt something shift inside her. She was still angry at him, still hurt by the coldness, the rejection, the way he'd treated her like an unwanted obligation. But she was also starting to understand the weight he carried, the impossible position he'd put himself in trying to protect everyone while keeping everyone at a distance. He'd said everyone he let in died, and suddenly Vivian understood. He wasn't keeping her out because he didn't care. He was keeping her out because he did. Because in his broken logic, loving someone meant putting them in danger, and the safest thing he could do was make sure no one got close enough to become a target. It was stupid, self-destructive, completely backwards, but it made a terrible kind of sense. Vivian watched him sleep and felt something crack open in her chest. Not quite forgiveness, not quite understanding, but something close. The beginning of seeing him as more than just the man who'd rejected her, as someone fighting battles she couldn't see, carrying grief that had never properly healed. Somewhere around 3 a.m, she finally dozed off in the chair. She woke at dawn to find Damien watching her, his eyes clearer than they'd been in days. "You stayed," he said quietly. "Someone had to make sure you didn't do anything stupid." Vivian stretched, her neck protesting the awkward position. "How do you feel?" "Like I got stabbed." But there was something almost like warmth in his voice. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." They looked at each other across the small distance between chair and bed, and something unspoken passed between them. Not quite trust, not quite forgiveness, but maybe the beginning of something real. "The meeting's tonight," Damien said finally. "With the Volkovs. I'm coming with you," Vivian said. "Absolutely not." "Yes." She stood, crossing her arms. "You said I'm part of this world now. You said everyone who gets close to you ends up in danger. Well, I'm already close and already in danger by virtue of wearing your ring. So stop trying to protect me from reality and let me actually see what you do." "It's too dangerous." "Everything about this life is dangerous. But I'd rather face it beside you than be locked away wondering if you're going to come home or if I'm going to get a phone call telling me you're dead." The words came out harder than she'd intended. "I won't be useless, Damien. I won't be decorative. Either let me in or what?" He was sitting up now, wincing but focused entirely on her. "Or accept that this marriage is exactly what you said it was. A business arrangement, nothing more." Vivian met his eyes. "But you can't have it both ways. You can't shut me out and expect me to care when you come home bleeding. You can't keep me at a distance and then look at me like you did last night when I stayed. Choose what you want this to be and stick with it." Silence stretched between them. Damien's jaw worked, emotions flickering across his face too quickly to identify. "Fine," he said finally. "You can come, but you do exactly what I say when I say it. No arguments. Deal. And if things go wrong, you run. You don't try to help, you don't try to be heroic, you just run and let the security team handle it. Vivian wanted to argue but saw the set of his jaw. Okay. I mean it, Vivian. I need your word on this. You have it. She moved to the door. Now get some more rest. You look like death. Flattering. Honest. She paused in the doorway. That's what you asked for, isn't it? Honesty instead of performance? Something that might have been a smile ghosted across his face. Get out of here before I change my mind about tonight. Vivian left, but as she walked back to her own room, she felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Dangerous, probably stupid, almost certainly going to end in more pain, but hope nonetheless. Maybe this marriage could become something real after all. Or maybe she was just setting herself up for heartbreak. Either way, tonight would tell. The meeting location was a warehouse in Red Hook, chosen because it was technically neutral territory, owned by neither the Morettis nor the Volkovs, monitored by enough of both families' people that neither side could stage an ambush without the other knowing immediately. Vivian sat in the back seat of the SUV, dressed in black pants and a dark sweater that Damien had wordlessly handed her that afternoon. Practical clothes, the kind you could move in if things went wrong. Last chance to change your mind, Damien said from the front passenger seat. His color was better than this morning, but Vivian could see the tightness around his mouth that meant he was in pain. I'm not changing my mind. He glanced back at her, something complicated in his expression. Stay close to Marcus. If shooting starts, you drop to the floor and cover your head, understand? Yes. I'm serious, Vivian. These people, the Volkovs, don't play by rules. If they think they can get an advantage by hurting you, I understand. She met his eyes. I'll be careful. Marcus pulled up to the warehouse. Other vehicles were already there. 3 black SUVs that Vivian recognized as Moretti cars, and 2 sedans that presumably belonged to the Volkovs. Men in dark suits stood around the perimeter, weapons visible under jackets, the kind of casual display of force that was meant to remind everyone what was at stake. Damien got out slowly, favoring his injured side. Antonio materialized beside him immediately, a subtle support system. Vivian followed Marcus, staying close like she'd been told. The warehouse interior was vast and mostly empty, just concrete floors and metal rafters, and the echo of footsteps. A table had been set up in the center, wooden, scarred, probably dragged out of storage somewhere. 2 chairs on each side. The Volkovs were already there. Alexei Volkov was in his 60s, silver-haired, the kind of man who'd probably been handsome once before violence and time had carved their marks into his face. Beside him sat his oldest son, Dmitri, who looked like a younger, harder version of his father. No sign of Victor, the son who'd attacked Damien. Probably being punished somewhere, Vivian thought. Moretti. Alexei's accent was thick, Russian inflection turning the name into something harder. You look like shit. You should see your son, Damien said, lowering himself into a chair with controlled precision. Oh wait, you can't. He's in a hospital bed. Victor is young, stupid, acts without thinking. Alexei's expression didn't change. This is not how I wanted things to go. Then you should control your family better. Perhaps? Alexei's eyes slid to Vivian, standing behind Damien with Marcus. You bring your wife to business meeting? My wife goes where I go. Damien's voice was flat, definitive. Something passed across Alexei's face, surprise maybe, or calculation. Interesting choice. They talked for over an hour. Vivian tried to follow the conversation, but it was dense with coded language and references to things she didn't understand. Territory disputes, shipping routes, percentages of various operations. The language of men dividing up a city like it was property they owned rather than a place where millions of people lived. But she could read the undercurrents. Could see that Alexei was scared, that he'd lost control of his own family and was scrambling to prevent total war. Could see that Damien was pressing the advantage but carefully, not pushing so hard that Alexei would feel cornered and lash out. It was like watching chess played with human lives as pieces. So we have agreement? Alexei said finally. The waterfront stays divided as before. Your shipments come through the north docks, ours through the south. Victor pays restitution for the warehouse damage, and we both pretend this never happened. And Victor stays away from my operations, Damien added. Permanently. If I see him anywhere near my territory. You won't, Alexei's voice was hard. He's being sent to Moscow, indefinitely. Damien studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Fine. We have a deal. They stood, shook hands with all the warmth of two men handling toxic waste. Alexei gestured to Dmitri and they headed for the exit, their security team falling in around them. Vivian was starting to relax when she heard it, a sharp crack that echoed through the warehouse like thunder. Gunshot. Everything happened fast. Marcus was on her immediately, his body covering hers as he forced her to the ground. More shots, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Shouting in Italian and Russian, the scrape of weapons being drawn, chaos erupting around her. Stay down, Marcus hissed in her ear. But Vivian could see through the gap beneath Marcus's arm. Could see Damien on the ground, Antonio covering him, blood spreading across the concrete. Could see one of the Volkov men with a rifle, aiming for another shot while Alexei shouted something furious in Russian. The shooter wasn't listening, was lining up his shot again, pointing directly at where Damien lay exposed. Vivian didn't think, just moved. She twisted out from under Marcus's grip, heard him shout her name, and ran. Not away from the danger like she'd promised. Toward it. The shooter's finger was on the trigger when Vivian hit Damien, covering his body with hers. She felt the impact of the bullet like a sledgehammer to her left shoulder, felt herself slam into concrete, felt pain explode through her in ways she'd never imagined. Then nothing but noise and confusion in Damien's face above hers, his mouth moving, but she couldn't hear the words over the ringing in her ears. The warehouse dissolved into violence. She was vaguely aware of Antonio firing, of the shooter going down, of more gunfire that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Damien was trying to move her, trying to get her to safety, his hands on her face saying things she still couldn't hear. Then Marcus was there, lifting her like she weighed nothing, running. The pain in her shoulder was unbearable, spreading through her chest and down her arm like fire. She tried to stay conscious, tried to focus on Damien's face beside her as they ran, but the world was going gray at the edges. The last thing she remembered was being placed in a vehicle, Damien's hand gripping hers, his face white and terrified. Then darkness. She woke in a hospital room, which was disorienting because the last thing she remembered was a warehouse and gunfire and pain. Now there was just sterile white walls and the steady beep of monitors and a different kind of pain, duller, controlled by whatever they'd given her through the IV in her arm. You're awake. Vivian turned her head, slowly, because even that small movement hurt, and found Damien sitting beside the bed. He looked worse than she'd ever seen him. Unshaven, dark circles under his eyes. His clothes rumpled like he'd been wearing them for days. How long? Her voice came out scratchy, raw. 2 days. He leaned forward, his hand finding hers carefully, like he was afraid she might break. You've been unconscious for 2 days. The bullet hit your shoulder, missed the bone, but tore through muscle. They had to operate to remove it and repair the damage. You're okay. It wasn't a question. She could see him sitting there, breathing, alive. Because of you. His voice cracked. Because you threw yourself in front of a bullet meant for me like some kind of... He stopped, his jaw working. What the hell were you thinking? I was thinking I didn't want to be a widow. You promised you'd run if things went wrong. I lied. Vivian tried to smile, but it hurt. Besides, you would have done the same thing. That's different. How? How is it different? She squeezed his hand weakly. You said everyone you care about dies. Well, I care about you, even though you've given me approximately 0 reasons to, even though you've been cold and distant and treated me like an unwanted obligation. I care, so I wasn't going to just watch you die. Damien stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. You could have been killed. So could you. That was the whole point. Vivian closed her eyes, suddenly exhausted. What happened after? Did they... The shooter was Victor. Damien's voice went hard. He'd been hiding in the rafters the whole time, waited until his father agreed to terms and then tried to finish what he started. Alexei had his own men put him down. The alliance stands, actually stronger now because Alexei owes me. Victor's death removes a problem for both families. So it's over? It's over. He was still holding her hand, his thumb moving in small circles across her knuckles. The Volkovs are handling cleanup, paying for damages, staying in their territory. We won. Yay. Vivian opened her eyes. I feel super victorious right now. Something that might have been a laugh escaped Damien's throat. You're insane, you know that? I married you. That should have been your first clue. This time he definitely laughed, though it sounded broken. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that felt nothing like the cold, performative touch from their wedding. I thought I lost you, he said quietly. When you went down, when I saw the blood, I thought... His voice broke completely. I've been sitting here for 2 days thinking about how I wasted every moment we had, how I pushed you away and hurt you and treated you like you didn't matter when you were the only thing that... He stopped, breathing hard, looking wrecked. Damien, Vivian said gently, I'm not good at this. He was still holding her hand like a lifeline, at letting people in, at being vulnerable. After Isabel died, I told myself I'd never do it again. Never care about anyone enough that losing them would destroy me. But then your father proposed this marriage, and I saw your picture, and you looked so much like her that I convinced myself it was a sign. That maybe I could have something close to what I'd lost without actually risking anything real. That's incredibly messed up, Vivian said. I know. He met her eyes. I know it was wrong. Using you as a substitute, keeping you at a distance, all of it. But I was so afraid of caring about someone again, of losing someone again, and I thought if I just kept you far enough away, if I made sure you never became important, I'd be safe, Vivian finished. And so would you. Yes? He looked down at their joined hands. But you didn't stay away. You fought back. You demanded to be seen. You forced your way past every wall I built until I couldn't pretend anymore that you were just a convenient arrangement. And then you threw yourself in front of a bullet for me, and I realized... He took a shaky breath. I realized I was in love with my wife. Actually, genuinely in love with the real you, not the ghost I'd tried to make you into. And the terror of that was worse than anything the Volkovs could do to me. Vivian's heart was pounding. You love me? Terrifyingly. His smile was crooked, vulnerable, completely. In a way that makes me want to lock you away somewhere safe and never let you near danger again, which I know you'd hate, which is just another reason why I love you. That was a very long sentence. I'm nervous. He laughed, the sound almost hysterical. I'm confessing my feelings to a woman I've treated terribly while she's lying in a hospital bed because she took a bullet for me. I'm allowed to be nervous. Vivian wanted to respond, but the door opened and a nurse came in, all business and efficiency, checking monitors and asking questions about pain levels. Damien reluctantly released her hand and stepped back, giving the nurse space to work. By the time the nurse left with promises to return with medication, Vivian was fighting to keep her eyes open. Sleep, Damien said, retaking his seat beside the bed. We can talk more when you're stronger. Don't leave, Vivian said. I'm not going anywhere. He took her hand again, gentle and sure. I'll be right here when you wake up. She believed him. Recovery was slow and painful and boring. 3 days in the hospital, then a week of bed rest at the brownstone, then another 2 weeks of physical therapy to regain full range of motion in her shoulder. Damien was there for all of it, bringing her books, sitting with her during the worst of the pain, arguing with doctors about medication and treatment plans. It was strange seeing this version of him. Attentive, worried, completely present in a way he'd never been before. Sometimes Vivian would catch him watching her with an expression that was part wonder, part terror, like he couldn't quite believe she was real and was afraid she'd disappear if he looked away. You're staring again, she said one afternoon, 3 weeks after the shooting. She was doing physical therapy exercises in the living room, raising her arm slowly through its range of motion while Damien watched from the couch. I'm observing, he corrected, making sure you're not pushing too hard. I'm following the therapist's instructions exactly. You're grimacing every time you lift above shoulder height. That's just my face. He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his whole expression. Vivian still wasn't used to it, this version of Damien who smiled and laughed and let his guard down. How's the pain? He asked. Manageable. She completed the set and lowered her arm carefully. The therapist says I should have full mobility back in another month or so. Good. He stood, crossing to her. Though if I have my way, you'll never need to use it to throw yourself in front of bullets again. If you have your way, I'll be wrapped in bubble wrap and locked in a tower. Don't tempt me. But he was smiling as he said it, his hand settling gently on her waist. I'm trying very hard to respect your independence while also managing my overwhelming urge to protect you from everything. How's that going? Terribly. He kissed her forehead. You're very bad for my blood pressure. This was new too, the casual affection, the touches that weren't performative or impersonal but genuine. It had started small, tentative, like Damien was relearning how to be intimate with another person. A hand on her back that lingered, sitting close enough that their shoulders touched, brushing her hair back from her face when she was tired. Now, a month after the shooting, it felt almost natural, like maybe they were actually becoming the thing they'd been pretending to be. We should talk about something, Vivian said. His expression grew cautious. That sounds ominous. Not ominous, just, we need to figure out what we're doing here. She stepped back slightly so she could see his face properly. A month ago, you told me you loved me, and then I was unconscious or heavily medicated for most of the time since. And now we're in this weird space where you're being wonderful and attentive, but we haven't actually talked about what happens next. Damien was quiet for a moment, his hand still resting on her waist. What do you want to happen next? I want to know if you meant it. The love thing. I meant it. No hesitation. Every word. And the stuff about me reminding you of Isabel? About using me as a substitute? He flinched but didn't look away. That was true too, at first. But Vivian, somewhere along the way, probably earlier than I'm willing to admit, you stopped being anyone but yourself. You were never her. You were always you. And it's you I fell in love with. Even though I'm bossy and stubborn and threw myself in front of a bullet? Especially because of those things. His smile was soft. You're everything I didn't know I needed. Everything I was too afraid to let myself want. Vivian felt her chest tighten. I love you too. In case that wasn't clear. It wasn't. His hands tightened on her waist. Say it again. I love you. She reached up with her good arm, touching his face. Even though you're emotionally constipated and terrible at communication and locked me in my room on our wedding night. I'm never going to live that down, am I? Not a chance. He kissed her then, properly, the kind of kiss that had been missing from every moment since their hollow wedding. It was careful because of her shoulder, sweet because of all the words they'd finally said, and absolutely nothing like the cold performance at the altar. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Damien rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said. Vivian laughed. We're already married. Marry me again, properly this time. He pulled back enough to look at her. No business arrangements, no family obligations, no performing for crowds. Just us, choosing each other, meaning the vows we say. Are you proposing to your own wife? Yes. He was completely serious now. Because the first time didn't count. That was two people trapped in their father's deal. I want to marry you, Vivian Sterling, the woman who demands to be seen, who fights back, who threw herself in front of a bullet because she cared too much to watch me die. Will you marry me? Again? Vivian felt tears threatening and didn't fight them. Yes. Yes? Yes, you idiot. I'll marry you again. She kissed him, ignoring the twinge of pain from her shoulder. Though I'm keeping the ring from the first wedding, that thing cost more than a car. He laughed, the sound bright and genuine, and kissed her again. They planned the second wedding for 3 months later, giving Vivian time to fully heal, and both of them time to actually learn how to be married to each other. Not the performance version, the real version where they ate breakfast together and argued about stupid things and learned each other's rhythms. It wasn't perfect. Damien still struggled with letting people in, still had moments where he pulled away before catching himself. Vivian still pushed too hard sometimes, demanded too much, refused to accept his protective instincts without question. But they worked at it, actually worked at building something real. The wedding was small, just 20 people in a garden outside the city, officiated by a judge who was a friend of Damien's and had no connections to either of their families' business interests. Vivian wore a simple white dress, nothing like the elaborate gown from the first wedding. Damien wore a suit but no tie, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. When the judge asked if he took Vivian to be his wife, Damien's "I do" was strong and certain and completely genuine. When Vivian said her own "I do," she meant every syllable. The kiss was nothing like their first. This one was real, full of promise and future, and two people who'd chosen each other despite every reason not to. Marcus took photos. Mrs. Chen cried. Antonio made a speech about how he'd never thought he'd see Damien happy again and was grateful to be wrong. They had dinner at a restaurant Vivian loved. Nothing fancy or performative, just good food and better company. No business associates, no political connections, no one who was there for anything except celebrating two people who'd found their way to each other through all the wrong reasons and somehow made it work. Later, at the Brownstone, their home now, not his house where she was a guest, Damien carried her over the threshold. "You know this is traditionally for first marriages," Vivian said, laughing. "This is our first marriage." He set her down carefully in the foyer. The other one was just a rehearsal. A really terrible rehearsal. The worst. He kissed her softly. But it got us here. Eventually. They'd redecorated over the past few months. The house was still elegant but warmer now, with Vivian's touches softening the hard edges Damien had built into every corner. Photos on the walls. Of them, of friends, of moments that mattered. Books scattered on tables. Evidence of life being lived rather than just time being endured. "I have something for you," Damien said, leading her to the living room. On the coffee table sat a leather-bound book. Vivian opened it and found photos. Of today, of the small ceremony, of them looking at each other like they were the only two people who existed. "How did you—" "I had Marcus send them while we were at dinner." Damien settled beside her on the couch. "I wanted you to have them tonight, proof that this one was real." Vivian looked through the photos, her throat tight. Here was evidence of everything they'd become. Two people who'd started as strangers, trapped in obligation, and had somehow become partners, lovers, best friends. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For changing your mind. About us. About letting me in." She looked at him. "I know how hard that was for you. You didn't give me much choice." His smile was soft. "You just kept pushing until all my walls fell down. And now? Now I'm terrified every day that something will happen to you, that I'll lose you the way I lost Isabel." He took her hand. "But I'm also happier than I've been in years. Maybe happier than I've ever been. Because you taught me that love doesn't have to mean loss. That sometimes it just means finding someone stubborn enough to refuse to let you push them away." Stubborn is one word for it. It's the nice word. He was smiling now. The others are less flattering. "Tell me anyway." "Obstinate, relentless, absolutely impossible to discourage. You say the sweetest things." He kissed her deep and slow, the kind of kiss that promised more. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with something that made Vivian's pulse race. "I love you," he said. "My stubborn, impossible, wonderful wife. I love you too." She touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw. "My emotionally damaged, overprotective, surprisingly romantic husband." "Surprisingly? You locked me in my room on our wedding night." The bar was very low. He laughed and kissed her again, and they stayed like that for a long time, just holding each other in the home they'd built together, surrounded by evidence of all the wrong turns that had somehow led them exactly where they needed to be. 6 months later, Damien walked away from the family business. It wasn't immediate or easy. There were months of negotiation, of carefully transitioning power to Antonio and the other senior members, of making sure the organization wouldn't collapse without him. But he did it, piece by piece, until his involvement was minimal enough that he could step back entirely. "Are you sure?" Vivian asked the night before his official retirement was announced. They were in bed, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. "I'm sure." His voice was certain. "I've spent my entire life in that world. It's cost me everything, my first wife, years of my life, nearly cost me you. I'm done paying that price." "What will you do?" "I don't know yet." He shifted so he could see her face. "Figure it out as I go. Maybe work with legitimate businesses for once. Maybe travel. Maybe just exist without constantly looking over my shoulder waiting for the next crisis." "That sounds nice." "It sounds terrifying," he smiled. "But also right. I want a life, Vivian. A real one. With you. Not running an empire, not managing territories, just living." They left New York a month after Damien's retirement was finalized. Not permanently. The Brownstone was still theirs, still home. But they needed distance from everything that had defined them. They spent 3 months traveling. Europe first, then Asia, wandering through cities and small towns with no agenda except experiencing things together. Damien was different away from New York. Lighter, more open, laughing easier. Vivian watched him slowly shed the weight he'd carried for so long and felt like she was seeing who he might have been if violence hadn't carved itself into his bones. They came back to New York different. Not better, exactly, but more themselves. More solid. Damien started a legitimate security consulting firm, using all his knowledge of how to protect things without the criminal element. It was successful almost immediately, because of course it was. He had decades of expertise and connections that translated well to legal work. Vivian went back to school, got a degree in social work, started working with families affected by organized crime. It felt right, using her position and resources to help people trapped in the same world that had almost destroyed both of them. They had dinner with her father occasionally, tense, awkward affairs, where Lawrence Sterling clearly didn't understand his daughter's choices, but was wealthy enough to respect them. The business arrangement that had brought them together had served its purpose. Now it was just a footnote in a story that had become something much larger. 2 years after their second wedding, Vivian found out she was pregnant. She told Damien over breakfast, just handed him the test, and watched his face cycle through shock, terror, and finally pure joy. "We're having a baby," he said, like he couldn't quite believe it. "We're having a baby," Vivian confirmed. He pulled her into his arms, careful and tender, and she felt him trembling slightly. "I'm going to be terrible at this." "Probably," she laughed against his chest. "But you'll try. That's all anyone can do." Their daughter was born on a Tuesday in October, 7 pounds and absolutely perfect. They named her Catherine, after Vivian's mother, and Damien held her like she was made of glass and cried without shame. "She looks like you," he said, staring at the tiny face. "She looks like herself," Vivian corrected. "She's not a substitute or a reminder or anything except exactly who she is." He understood what she meant, smiled through his tears, and kissed both of them. "You're right. She's perfect. Completely her own person." Being parents was chaos. Catherine didn't sleep, cried at random intervals, turned their carefully organized lives into something messy and unpredictable. Damien was terrified he'd break her. Vivian was terrified she'd mess up in some fundamental way. But they figured it out together, stumbling through diaper changes and middle-of-the-night feedings and the overwhelming responsibility of keeping another human alive. And slowly, in the midst of the chaos, Vivian realized something. This was what she'd wanted all along. Not perfection, not a fairy tale, just real life with someone who chose her every day, who was willing to be imperfect and scared and completely present. 5 years after their second wedding, they hosted Thanksgiving at the Brownstone. The house was full, Antonio and his family, Marcus and his wife, Mrs. Chen, who'd become more family than employee, a few other people who'd become part of their chosen family over the years. Catherine, now 3, ran between guests with the fearless energy of someone who'd never known anything but love and safety. Damien watched her with an expression that was part wonder, part terror, completely devoted. "You okay?" Vivian asked, settling beside him on the couch. "Yeah." He pulled her close, kissing her temple. "Just thinking about how different this is from where we started." "Better different?" Infinitely better." He looked at her, and Vivian saw everything in his eyes: love, gratitude, the bone-deep relief of someone who'd found home after years of being lost. "I never thought I'd have this again. Family, happiness, a reason to wake up that wasn't just obligation." "You deserve it," Vivian said quietly. "You deserve all of it. So do you." He touched her face gently. "Thank you for not giving up on me, for pushing past every wall I built, for being stubborn enough to make me fall in love with you. It's my special talent, among many." He kissed her, soft and sure. "I love you. Have I mentioned that today?" "Only twice." "You're slacking." "Then let me make it 3. I love you, Vivian Moretti, more than I thought I could love anything." "I love you too." She rested her head on his shoulder, watching their daughter play, surrounded by people who mattered. "We did good, didn't we? Took something broken and made it whole." "We did." His arm tightened around her. "We really did." Later that night, after everyone had gone home and Catherine was asleep, Damien and Vivian stood in the library where she'd first found the photo album of Isabel. He'd brought it down from wherever he'd hidden it, was looking through it with an expression that was sad but no longer devastated. "I'll always love her," he said quietly. "She was my first love, my first marriage, and she'll always be part of who I am." "I know," Vivian said, "and that's okay. Love doesn't have to be exclusive. You can love who you lost and who you found. You're very wise for someone so stubborn. It's a gift." She took his hand. "Can I tell you something? Anything. I used to be so angry at her, at Isabel, because you loved her so completely that there wasn't room for anyone else. But I'm not angry anymore." Vivian looked at the photos, at the happy couple frozen in time. "She made you who you are, the good parts and the broken parts, and those parts made you the person I fell in love with. So maybe I should be grateful to her instead." Damien's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "She would have liked you, would have appreciated someone who doesn't take my nonsense. I would have liked her, too." And Vivian meant it. She had good taste in men, after all. He laughed, the sound watery but genuine, and closed the album. They put it back on the shelf together, not hidden this time, just integrated into their life. Part of the past that informed their present without defining it. That night, lying in bed with Vivian curled against him, Damien thought about how far they'd come. From that cold wedding where he'd locked her away, through all the pain and fear and learning to love again, to this moment, this peace. It hadn't been easy. Nothing worthwhile ever was. But they'd done the work, both of them, choosing each other every day even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. "Hey," Vivian murmured, half asleep. "What are you thinking about?" "How lucky I am," Damien said honestly. "How close I came to losing this before I even knew what I had." "But you didn't lose it." Her hand found his in the dark. "We figured it out. Together." "Together," he agreed and kissed her forehead. Outside, Manhattan hummed with its endless energy. Inside, in their home filled with evidence of life being lived and love being chosen, Damien and Vivian slept peacefully. They'd started as strangers forced together by obligation. They'd become partners who chose each other freely. And in choosing each other, they'd found something better than the fairy tale they'd never been promised. They'd found real, messy, imperfect, absolutely real love. The kind built on honesty and stubbornness and the willingness to keep showing up even when it was hard. The kind that survived bullets and business deals and all the ways people can hurt each other when they're too scared to be vulnerable. The kind worth fighting for. And they had fought, both of them. For themselves, for each other, for the life they wanted to build. The life they were living now. Together.